Hello everyone, a very good morning to you all. Thank you for joining us here with the Tibetan Buddhist Society of Canberra. We are doing this weekly Sunday morning talk. Right now we are doing on the series of the life of Buddha. We are still continuing where we left last week. So take a couple moments to gather your thoughts and most importantly, good intention, thinking and learning, reflecting on the Buddha and his qualities, his specifics of his, what we call the life of the Buddha is a very meritorious thing to do. So therefore, in itself is a good subject and object of meditation to soak our mind in the one and only enlightened one that world has been graced thus far, and his teaching is affecting all of our lives in many different ways. When we tune our mind to it, it's always there to go in the pool of goodness. And so in order to remind us to do that, we're going to pay our respect and homage by taking refuge and renewing our refuge. Renewing refuge isn't just done by reciting prayers, it's done consciously. Most importantly, throughout the day and time when we need to turn our mind to the light rather than in the darkness is the real refuge. Of course, formality, doing refuge prayer 3 times is a convention that we always resort to, and also cultivating the right intention and particularly altruistic motivation in listening. Some people's life got changed by listening to the right information. Other people's life got misdirected by listening to wrong and negative information. So what kind of thing we listen to has a lot of effect on our directions of not only in general life and specific choices we may or may not make ourselves. So learning about the life of Buddha and how the teaching continued thereafter is a very good thing. So therefore we're going to renew our altruistic motivation for the benefit of by listening to this story and teachings, that our mind stream be a little bit soaked with the good enlightened mentality that we seek to cultivate, be it through discipline or meditation or study. Whatever we do, we try to have this ongoing the richness of the Dharma stay on our mind so that we do not fall on the precipices of the samsara's world. And when we do take refuge and remember bodhicitta, we will be very, very committed to practice loving kindness to everyone, and most importantly, sentient beings who have more suffering than any happiness that can make up for them. We develop compassion, and when we practice these twofold, loving kindness and compassion, you will find your mind is a lot more happier, joyful. At least you didn't resort to aggression and violence and tit for tat, and you let go, you forgive, you pardon, you confess. You didn't brooded anger or resentment. And when you remember these things, you really feel joyful. You really know that's the true Dharma. That's the true medicine. And so you will have joyfulness. When you have that, even some people are really difficult. We don't mind. We're able to remain equanimously. Things will change. Then it's not just them. I need to be gentle. I need to be equanimous. I shouldn't react or overreact, and things will change. And usually they do. If we stir up, then things get much more muddled up than they actually are. So equanimity. So these 4 immeasurables: loving kindness, joyfulness, equanimity. We will repair. So most of you know the prayers. Please join your hands at the heart, and we're going to do those prayers first. O in the Buddha Dharma Sangha, I take refuge and enlightenment by virtue of and I shall Buddha Utu in the Buddha Dhamma Sangha, I take refuge and enlightenment by virtue of and I shall Buddha Utu in the Buddha Dharma Sangha, I take refuge and enlightenment by virtue of and I shall Buddha Utu happiness and the cause of happiness, may they be free from suffering and the cause of suffering. May they never part from the happiness that knows no suffering. May they dwell equanimity, free from attachment and aversion to those near and far. May hobbies happiness and the cause of happiness, may they be free from suffering and the cause of suffering. May they never part from the happiness that knows no suffering. May they dwell equanimity, free from attachment and aversion to those near and far. May hobbies happiness and the cause of happiness, may they be free from suffering and the cause of suffering. May they never part from the happiness and no suffering. May they dwell equanimity, free from attachment and aversion to those near and far. according to the intelligence and predisposition of it, where the yetanda dharma agrelo and come goals. So, welcome back everyone. Most of you are familiar with the procedures here. Those who are joining for the first time, welcome. The Sunday morning talks have certain topics. This time we are doing on series on the life of the Buddha. It is very important that Buddhists know the life of the Buddha, so that the Buddhism doesn't become Lamaism, that Buddhism stays Buddhism because then people know about the Buddha. Quite a lot of fragmented small lineages that sprang over the last 6, 7 centuries or 10 centuries, 11th century in the Himalaya, they all become so fragmented in their little own groups. They hardly know about the Buddha, which is quite misleading. So that's why it is very important that we, as a pan-Buddhist, need to know the historicity of the Buddha and his life and his teachings. Then we know how one we all are in following the very teachings of the same Buddha. Otherwise, people think that all the lineages got some unique teachings, Buddha didn't give, which is quite misleading, because I don't think there was any teaching that Buddha left ungiven, He said to have given 84,000 discourses, Yet some of the lineages think they have some unique teachings that Buddha didn't give, whether they got in the dreams or pure visions and things like that, and try to make some kind of reason why they are so unique, and hardly talk even about Buddha. They talk about those supernatural deities who appeared in the dream of one teacher or something like that, and they all get carried away and then get really not understanding the whole pictures of the Buddha itself. So I have had the great benefit of living in Lumbini, the birthplace of Buddha, and so my whole monastic life, 12 years spent in living in Lumbini, where I had the opportunity to witness the pilgrims from flocking to that very desolate, neglected Lumbini, the birthplace of Buddha, but yet it attracts pilgrims from all over the world, from Japan to Thai, crown prince and king, as well as people from Sri Lanka and Bhutan and America, Vietnam, Cambodia, Ladakh, Mongolia, and China, and Korea, everybody come to bow down to the same one and only Buddha. What a wonderful way to see that. And this just opened my mind a lot more than other Tibetans who always think about their lineage, stuck in their own little villages, and hardly know much about the others. And also when they teach the lesson, they always talk about schools and how the others got wrong and our school got right. All this very, very polemical way of teaching the differences in the lineages all the time, which I find very, very unhealthy in this world that is so small now. We need to unite together. We need to listen to His Holiness Dalai Lama's discourse that how we should bring all the world as one family, one humanity. And even His Holiness goes as far as, even with people who don't believe, we should embrace all of them, never mind different religions. And yet Buddhists have to come together under the umbrella of one Buddha. So one best way to do that is people have better understanding of life of the Buddha. We have already done 6 sessions on this topic, and we covered all the historical life of the Buddha itself. Last week we finished by talking about passing away of the Buddha and then dividing of his relics into 8 portions, and then given to different 8 kingdoms of India. So they all contented without major dispute over the holy remains of the Buddha. And And so we left at that. This week we will going to talk about how after the passing away of Buddha, what happened, how did they grapple themselves together to compile the teachings together, and who were the key people who played the role after the passing away of Buddha. Because even though Buddha had some many amazing celebrated disciples like Shariputra and Moggallanaputra and so on, they all predeceased the Buddha, So they didn't survive the Buddha to continue the teaching. So what happened? So anyway, so Buddha had already himself spoken to his would-be successor, to Venerable Mahakashapa. Venerable Mahakashapa was the most learned of all the disciples, and he was also one of the many arhats. And so after the Buddha passed away, today we're going to talk about who were the successors after the Buddha passed away, and how did they do the compilation of the Buddha's teachings. So it is said Mahakashapa, the great successor of Buddha, acknowledged that he has to now head the order on account of his seniority in wisdom and virtues, and also what he have learned after the passing of the Buddha. And because during the passing of the Buddha, many bhikkhus pass away. Many of them just pass away, 80,000 of them passed away when the Buddha passed away. 70,000 passed away when Shariputra passed away, and 18,000, felt that the words of the Blessed One should not be forgotten and vanish like a smoke. So therefore, he said, I must make sure to invite all the senior bhikkhus and arhats who are there, and therefore have the convocation to make sure the teachings are not forgotten. Because there were lots of already small fragments, small kind of groups happening, and he was very concerned that the teaching may not stay long if something wasn't done together very well. And so then he said, who shall convoke the clergy? And then he straight away thought, who should be involved in doing this convocation? Let it be Venerable Purna. Venerable Purna was one of the senior monks. He thought he would be very good to ask him to beat the gong. Beat the gong. They have a wooden gong in the monasteries. They didn't have those nice Chinese metal gongs. That the Chinese are much better at making the things good. Indians always use this wooden gong. He said, ask the Venerable Purna to strike the gong and assemble the bhikkhus. Purna consented, and then after having entered the state of a deep meditative state, and they start to sort of gather all the sanghas, and then they discover all the sangha has been gathered, and then Kashyapa thought. Venerable Kashyapa thought, who he should ask to recount some of the teachings, teachings, and so he was considering. Kashyapa therefore said that if they had an exception, because they said when they said Ananda, for some reason, Ananda was one among the 500 bhikkhus that are assembled, but they all thought that Ananda has committed quite a few transgressions, and as a result of that, he has failed to attain arhathood. And but nevertheless, Kashyapa didn't want to sort of exclude this. So they say, because this is all happening in Kushinagar, yeah? Kushinagar is where Buddha passed away. And then they say, where should we convoke? Where should the convocation be held? And who should be invited? And so on. So they all invited everyone, and about those were most senior 500 bhikkhus. And arhats, by the way, they were all arhats. But they realized that Ananda has not reached arhathood yet. And so that meant Ananda has to be excluded. Ananda has to be excluded. They say, oh, where shall we have the convocation? They say we should have various people recommend various places. Finally, Kashyapa said, oh, we should go to Magadha, King Ajatasattu is the, one of the biggest recent converts, having now given up his friendship with the Devadatta. And the Ajatasattu will be able to offer all the needs of the 500 bhikkhus and so on. And then the Venerable Kashyapa thought, maybe we can invite Ananda to bring water for us. They thought he can bring him as a servant, so that Ananda doesn't get excluded. So he said, can we, by the way, can I invite Ananda so that he can help to bring water for us while we're having the convocations? And the bhikshus sort of kept quiet, they couldn't resist. They didn't want to rebel, so no, because yet it was really funny thing going on. Ananda, and anyway, so Kashyapa said that if they made an exception in Ananda's favor, the other bhikkhus who had something to do with the Blessed One would be angered. They thought, because he thought that, if they gave a special treatment to Ananda because Buddha's cousin, they still all cranky that Ananda made many mistakes. And if he had asked the Buddha to live long, Buddha would have lived long, but he never asked it. He's just, damn it, They were blaming him, when someone dies in the family, they always blame somebody, don't they? So poor Ananda got all the bashing. And they wanted to have this most important convocation of the Buddha's passing away, and most wanted to exclude Ananda. Can you believe that? It sounds very samsaric, doesn't it? Anyways, Kashyapa was very skillful, so he was able to say that, oh, maybe at least we can bring Ananda just to help us bring water. Everybody nodded their head. Oh, that will be okay. It's still good to bring water. And then one moment also, Venerable Kashyapa inadvertently called Ananda a boy. And then Ananda said, "Look, I have gray hairs on my head. You still think I'm a little boy?" And Ananda got, because Ananda was relatively young, because Ananda was born on Buddha's day of enlightenment. So when Buddha passed away in 81, so if you minus the 35 from 81, he was in his 40s. He was in late 40s, still calling him a boy. So they were, because all the young bhikkhus are always treated with this kind of thing. So he said, "Look, Venerable, I have gray hair on my head, and you're calling me a boy." On top of all this blaming that is occurring to Ananda, they're calling him a boy, and he just can't stand. And then somebody said, "Oh, you shouldn't speak to Venerable Kashyapa like that." So they're all correcting each other, Anyway, so then finally the bhikshus sanctioned the inclusion of Ananda, even though he's yet to be arhat, at least as an attendant for the other seniors. He can come along to the convocation to bring water. And then they said, "Ananda, you go ahead of everyone else. Go to Rajgriha and tell King Ajatasattu to make all the necessary preparation for that." And then so Ananda went, because they think Ananda still have to walk on foot, unlike all the arhats who can just fly, They all have their... So Ananda hasn't got enlightened yet, so he has to go on foot, He said, "You go ahead because you still have to do your bit, we can come in our jet." So Kashyapa told him the intention that there will be 500 senior bhikkhus who are well versed in sutras and Vinaya and Abhidharma, and the king would need to make all the necessary preparation for when they arrive. And so in the meantime, king has chosen a special place they go to. They call Pipala Cave. Pipala Cave. There's actually a big cave there. They think that's the place where the convocation was held. In any case, soon all the 500 bhikshus is assembled there. Kashyapa requested Aniruddha to examine if any of the 500 was still subject to defilements such as desire and anger and ignorance and jealousy and so on. And so it's like check when anybody's still infected or not. Is there any infected ones among the 500? And Aniruddha go and do the swab test, give swab test all the 500, and they discovered Ananda still is infected. Can you believe that? And then they were all then because they couldn't have the convocation because they have to have everybody free of infections. So Ananda wasn't just to bring the water. He has to be part of it, and he can't attend it, do anything as infected ones. So then they highlighted, Venerable Kashyapa highlighted all the transgressions of Ananda in front of everybody. in front of everybody. I wouldn't go through all of them, just few of them. One of the first is that Ananda should have never asked the Buddha to admit women in the highest ordination. That was his mistake number one, because Buddha said if he this will shorten at least 500 years of the duration of Dharma lifespan. But Ananda said, look, I was never thinking of the duration of lifespan. I was thinking the pain of the poor lady, Mahaprajapati Gautami, who has mothered the orphaned prince Siddhartha, and whose mother died, and she did so much hard labor. She suffered a lot of sadness and loss, and she deserved, among many, to be comforted by giving the ordination. I wasn't thinking of anything but just to comfort poor lady's suffering. They said, nevertheless, you never thought about the longevity of the doctrine, so you have caused the shortening of the lifespan of the doctrine for 500 years by admitting women. So they blame him. That's mistake number one. Another mistake is he offered the Buddha the muddy water, muddy water. Muddy water. He shouldn't have. Oh, he said, I thought Buddha was very thirsty. And another mistake was Ananda was mending the Buddha's robe, but half of the Buddha's robe was under his feet. He says, that's very disrespectful, You should not have any single part of the Buddha's robe fallen on the ground, let alone put your dirty feet on it. So you are really disrespectful to our enlightened teacher. And also another transgression was people came to see the Buddha's body, and Ananda showed the people to see the Buddha's holy body lying there, and showed the private part of the Buddha's body to the woman, saying how pure a Buddha was a monk, because his private part was completely not visible. But when he pulled it out, it would stretch meters long. And then he let it go. It goes straight in. And he said, that's a terrible, disrespectful thing. No. Ananda said, I was just trying to impress the woman how good a monk Buddha was, because he couldn't see his private part, because he hasn't got even a nipple size. So, quite interesting, isn't it? So they said, you shouldn't have done that to the Buddha. And another mistake was when Buddha said he was going to pass away, Mahakashyapa, you should have requested him to live long for the benefit of sentient beings, because we have so many sentient beings who haven't had this chance to meet the Buddha, and you never asked him to live long when Buddha had every opportunity to live long. And then Ananda said, I was possessed by evil the demons, I should have asked that, shouldn't I? So in any case, to cut the long story short, that Ananda, as Buddha's cousin, and who has attended the Buddha nearly over 25 years or more, they really want him to be part of the convocation, but he had all this. So then Venerable Kashyapa said, look, we have to delay the convocation until Ananda wash his, finish the quarantine. Finish the quarantine and have another test, and he's totally clean. So Ananda had to go in meditation retreat. He went into very good meditation retreat to purify himself, because he realized he has quite a few absent-mindedness during his term, and this has greatly sort of delayed his attainment of arhathood. And so Ananda was so grief-stricken, but he called to mind that Blessed One has said to him shortly before his death, Ananda, he had said, sorrow not, neither be displeased or afflicted. No matter what difficulties you may face after my passing away, you will take a very strong role under the guidance of none other than Mahakashyapa. He could hear that advice by the Buddha. Thou must turn to the bhikkhu Mahakashyapa. So you should always turn to Mahakashyapa's guidance no matter what. Be patient and do as he shall tell you. So Buddha has given advice to Ananda that no matter what many difficulties you may face, because Buddha foresaw all that, but you should just stay guided by Mahakashyapa and don't go anything, just obey him appropriately. And then Venerable Kashyapa said, weep not, Ananda, thou shalt magnify the law of virtue, thou shalt not bring it low. So he said, you just go and do your quarantine and you'll be fine. So we will wait for you. We'll wait for you. Anyway, so then Aniruddha again said to go, Ananda, destroy every particle of your passions, become an arhat, but only then you may enter the synod and therefore play a very effective part of the convocation. So Ananda went on to very severe, strong, strict meditation retreat. Ananda thought of his master who had passed away, and his eyes were filled with tears. Was very sad. But he departed from the city. He went to Vaishali, because Vaishali is the place where he asked the Buddha to ordain women. So that was become his adopted sort of home seat. So he went there to do his retreat. The Vaishali, by the way, from Magadha is these days only 2-hour drive. So those days not very far. So he went there and did his retreat in Vaishali. If you read the story of Vaishali, the Ananda's stupa is actually found in Vaishali. His remains were all buried there. So Ananda now goes to with his attendant Venerable Vajriputra, and then he goes there and does his long retreat. After he has done his retreat and attend, Ananda in the great bliss of his meditation of peace and enjoyment, having become an arhat, then he went back to Rajgriha and then reported to Venerable Kashyapa and his 500 other compatriots. They're saying, now I am clean. There's no infection left in me. I'm ready to come and assist you. And then Kashyapa said to the bhikshu, sirs, whereas hereafter bhikshus may be oblivious and ignorant or weak, but not be able to understand the sutras, Vinaya, Abhidharma, because there are no sutras or gathas. Therefore, in the four upon the gathas, the sutras will be recited. So in the afternoon, then they discuss who can do which of the collecting of the teachings. So as a result of them discussing, they realized the sutras or the discourses of the Buddha should be asked to Ananda, because Ananda has spent longest duration consistently in attending to the Buddha, and he heard most of the discourses from the Buddha. And therefore, we should ask now Ananda to read recite the sutras. We should ask Upali the barber to recite all the rules, all the monastic codes of Vinaya. And then he said, I will recite all the metaphysical teachings on Abhidharma. So in this way, then they in that very location where they have the convocation, then all of the monks have three-piece clothing, three-piece Dharma robes, yeah? And all of their upper Dharma robe were put on the floor, one top of each other. There are 500 Dharma robes, all piled one of this. 500 will be quite high, yeah? So that became the original throne of the Dharma teachers, Dharma teacher. So now he had the respect of all of the 500 others. So he set Ananda, mounted on this throne, and then he became the first recounter of the sutra. And then Mahakashyapa said, now this is the venerable Ananda. Now Ananda is a arhat, he's not just a bhikkhu. He's a fully realized arhat. Ask him to recount the sutra. So what I'm going to do is among all the sutras, there are many discourses of the Buddha, and some of them are discourses related with the Vinaya, others Abhidharma, but there are many other discourses. So all of the discourses Ananda recited began with the first sutra, first discourse. The first discourse is discourse of the spinning the wheel of Dharma, Dharma Chakra Parivartana Sutra. Yeah? That was the actual discourse Buddha gave in Varanasi. So I'm going to read that sutra to you because it is this week we just celebrated the Buddha's turning the wheel of Dharma, and that sutra goes like this. So the Ananda is the one who first uttered the word, "Thus I have heard." Evam Maya Shutram. So this means that he actually heard not a heresy from second person or third person. He himself was there. He himself was present, and therefore he himself remembered every word for word, because he has attained arahathood. Now he has the art of non-forgetfulness, every word. Only thing he add at the beginning is the kind of a prologue, where it was, when it was, who was present, and what caused the actual discourse. So it goes like this. Thus I've heard at one time, the Buddha was residing in the what we call the Risipatana. Risipatana is the site of the sagely descent. It's called Risipatana, is the Sanskrit name, in the region of Varanasi. It was from there that the Bhagwan called out and then bestowed teaching upon the 5 mendicants, saying thus: O seekers of virtue, one who is spiritually transcendent should not abide in these following 2 extremes. So this is the teaching talking about the not falling into the 2 extremes, the middle way, not falling into the extreme way. In the case of those who are full of wants and obsessed with the hedonism, they will become unseemly and low, while those who wrongly praise the suffering connected with the fatigue and bodily asceticism, this is the self-mortification, yeah? Because ordinary individuals are steeped in meaninglessness, are by that thereby steeped in meaninglessness themselves. All seekers of virtue, these are the extremes of the 2 extremes. This is these 2 extremes of extreme pleasure or extreme self-mortification. And one should not become involved in either of these 2. The middle way is taught by the Tathagata, the manifestly complete Buddha. It genuinely leads to the activation of insight, activation of wisdom, activation of serenity, lucid understanding, authentic comprehension, and ultimately nirvana. O seekers of virtue, what is the middle way taught by the Tathagata? It is that which genuinely leads to the cultivation of insight, cultivation of wisdom, cultivation of serenity, lucid understanding, authentic awareness, and peace. The middle way is the Eightfold Path. And as for those, these are right view, right thought, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right right effort, right mindfulness, and right meditation. So here, it is in the first sermon that Buddha talked about Eightfold Path. If you follow the Eightfold Path, then you follow the middle way. This middle way, too, is taught by the Tathagatas. It genuinely leads to the cultivation of wisdom and serenity and understanding. And these seekers of truth is the truth, noble truth of suffering. That is, birth is suffering, aging is suffering, sickness is suffering, death is suffering. Suffering of meeting with the unappealing, suffering of parting from the appealing, suffering of pursuing but not obtaining what is desired is suffering. In brief, the 5 psychophysical aggregates of grasping are all suffering. So this is talking about the first noble truth, first noble truth. And this, all seekers of virtue, is the noble truth of suffering. Noble truth of suffering's origination. So this is the second noble truth. That is, all that which constitute arising from craving, fixation to pleasure, and enthrallment with this and that, namely craving of attachment, craving for cyclic existence, and craving for separation from cyclic existence. And these all seekers of virtue is the noble truth of suffering of cessation. So this is the third noble truth. That is in regard to all those comprises such craving without exception, being free from desire for it, cessation of it, relinquishing of it, becoming detached from it, liberated from it, and unrestrained in freedom from it. So talking about the truth of cessation. And these all seekers of virtue is the noble truth of the path leading to suffering cessation. That is the Eightfold Path mentioned above. All seekers of virtue, in regard to the noble truth of suffering, concerning things not heard before, vision arose, insight arose, wisdom arose, awareness arose, illumination arose within me. So Buddha is talking how himself realized these. Moreover, the noble truth of suffering, all seekers of truth, must be comprehensively understood. So the noble truth of suffering must be understood, not only that it is pervasive, but it is also really don't exist in you ultimately. Only the ordinary people see the surface only. They don't see what is really behind the surface. The sufferings, if you really understand suffering, the suffering is firstly universal to the ordinary. Secondly, to the slightly realized ones, it's a cause of your compassion. For those who realize suffering doesn't even exist at all. It's empty of inherent existence. Seekers of virtue will regard itself concerning things not heard before. A vision will arise, insight will arise, wisdom will arise, and illumination will arise, those who embrace this path. So therefore, being able to put an end to the sorrow. In regard to the truth of the sufferings of origin, all seekers of virtue, concerning things not heard before, the origin of suffering must be fully eradicated. So that's the second noble truth, is the origin of suffering must be recognized and eradicated. Like in Ananda case, he has to get rid of them. All seekers of virtue, in regard to in this self, concerning things not heard before, vision will arise, insight will arise, wisdom will arise, awareness will arise, as well as illumination will arise with those who are able to abandon the true origin of the sorrow. The true origin of sorrow is one's own action and one's own affliction. It's not true origin of sorrow, not other people or other people's supposed or alleged wrongdoing. It's one's own action of thoughts, words, and deeds, and as well as affliction under the sway of which one performs them. So, in regard to the noble truth of the suffering's cessation, cessation must be actualized. Yeah, one must realize the actual suffering, the cessation of it, and if one is able to actualize the cessation, so actualization is the result of the fourth noble truth. In regard to the noble truth of suffering cessation, all seekers of truth, they come about as a result of following the noble truth of the path. So by following the noble truth of the path, as enumerated before, whether we look at the Eightfold Path in terms of Four Noble Truths, in terms of 12 links of interdependent origination, or not, all the following of the path accordingly will enable oneself to, by practicing the fourth noble truth, will enable ones to realize the third noble truth. All seekers of virtue. In this way, the wisdom of Four Noble Truth in their enumerated three phases. So usually they list the three, and then they talk about the nature of the Four Noble Truth, and the activities of the Four Noble Truth, and result of the Four Noble Truth. So in this way, there are 12 modes of teaching the Four Noble Truths. It's extremely pure. In this manner, all seekers of virtue, I, having manifestly perfect awakened enlightenment, Buddhahood, realize them one by one. And this wisdom I did come to behold. I attain unprecedented liberation, having leaving nothing behind, without again grasping at conditioned existence as a truly existing. There is nothing whatsoever to grasp to. In this way, the Buddha said, Bhagavan, having bestowed this teaching in these words, the fivefold group, the monks, spiritual mendicants, were deeply overjoyed at what they have heard. As soon as the transmission had been taught, the Venerable Kaudinya gave rise to the dust-free, stainless Dharma eye, meaning he attained the Arhathood. All things harvest light, which begin are things which will end. Bhagavan, having mightily turned the wheel of Dharma in motion, gods of the earth proclaimed, following announcement of praise, that which has not been able to be turned by anyone, whether spiritual contemplative, priests, gods, demons, almighty gods, or anyone else in the universe, unsurpassed wheel of Dharma, which has gone unturned, has been powerfully turned by the Bhagavan, after residing in the grove of Risipatana in the region of Varanasi. So the God went and proclaimed everywhere that Buddha has now set the wheel of Dharma in motion. Thereupon, having heard the uproar of earthly gods and the gods in the heavens of the four great kings, they proclaimed the announcement, that which has not been able to be turned by anyone, whether spiritual contemplatives and so on, which has gone unturned, has been powerfully turned by the fully enlightened one residing in Risipatana in the region of Varanasi. So this, therefore, each of the gods proclaimed, and then one former above the gods, above them gods also got heard, and so everybody now having heard the great event that came from the turning the wheel of Dharma. So upon having heard the joyous outcome, so all the six Desirem gods, lower one informed the one above, and one above the above, and all of this, finally, all the six Desirem gods all heard the teachings of the Buddha. The Kaudinya, who was the first one to realize, Kaudinya is one who understands it all. Kaudinya is the one who became the first seer of the four truths, as Buddha taught. So when we say noble truth, is Kaudinya thus understood everything what the Buddha said, having achieved the same. His name Kaudinya is sometimes called all understanding Kaudinya. So because of Kaudinya, was the first of the 5 mendicants who realized. Then others also did realize in a gradual phase. So in this way, Ananda set the wheel of Dharma of motion. He repeated all the sutras, and then of course Ananda became the recounter, teller, because Shravaka means hearers and tellers. So he became both not only the hearer but also the first teller. First teller of the sutras was Ananda. And once Ananda has finished all the sutra, then came the role of the Venerable Upali. Venerable Upali, who's the barber, did all talk about all the monastic codes, so we won't go into the detail like that. And then likewise, Mahakashyapa himself did tell the story of all the story told about the teachings of the what we call the Abhidharma. So these 3, Sutra Pitaka and Vinaya Pitaka and Abhidharma Pitaka, these 3 are called Tripitaka. Tripitaka means collection of 3 baskets. So baskets of teaching on discourses, Sutra Pitaka, and baskets of teaching on the monastic codes of ethics, when mainly called Vinaya Pitaka, and then collection of teaching that is mainly metaphysical, on psychology, on various meditation subjects, and all of those were compiled by Venerable Mahakashyapa himself. So that become Abhidharma Pitaka. So this Tripitaka is the name of the Buddhist canon. In Theravadan tradition, they have Tripitaka, maybe about 40 volumes, and the other Buddhist tradition has a similar number, some even much more than that, because they also include the commentaries by subsequent Indian teachers. In this way, all the teachings were compiled together, and King Ajatasattu became the benefactor of that, and so Venerable Mahakashyapa succeeded to that was his great legacy, was to compile all the teachings, standardize the teachings. But even then, I think there was no written form of the text. It was all memory, because there's those days everyone becoming was arhats in no time, So anyway, so Venerable Mahakashyapa then has told Ananda to become his successor. So Ananda became his successor. Then Ananda passed his role, and then he passed over to Venerable Shanavasin. Venerable Shanavasin passed to Venerable Upagupta. Upagupta passed away to Ditika, Venerable Ditika. That's the 5th. And 6th one was Venerable Krishna, and the 7th one is called Venerable Sudarshana. So there were 7 patriarchs during the first 120 years after the Buddha passed away, during which all the teachings, particularly the Venerable Shanavasin, was the one who had a great legacy to spread Dharma in Kashmir. Kashmir in the old days, Kashmir was very Buddhist, very Buddhist. This is very early in the. We were talking about what we are talking just now is we are talking about 400 BC, 400 BC, and then when Buddhism spread in 300 BC to Kashmir. And not to mention other parts of India, but because Venerable Shanavasin moved to Kashmir, because he has a special prayer to be able to spread Dharma to Kashmir, which later had a very strong influence of spreading Buddhism to many Central Asian republics, and including also later on to Tibet, because of the distance from Kashmir was much nearer to travel to many Central Asian republics as well as even Tibet. So Dharma for 120 years. So in terms of history, King Ashoka the Great came after 100 years after Buddha passed away. He became the devotee to the 4th patriarch, Venerable Upagupta. Venerable Upagupta, of course, when those days, all of those venerable were really venerable, because they were all arhats. They were all arhats. They could show amazing, unthinkable miracles that even Buddha did not sort of show himself. But those arhats were able to do all sorts of things, and their followers were so many, into thousands, and they spread the Dharma merely by showing their magical feats and various spiritual, supernatural powers. So anyway, King Ashoka was a very ruthless monarch. Most monarchs are ruthless. He was probably more ruthless than anybody else. And when he became very powerful, later on he met Venerable Upagupta, and just mere sight of Upagupta's decorum and his nobleness, his discipline, his purity, just completely changed the mind of King Ashoka. And Ashoka later on became disciple of Upagupta. And because of the influence of a monk like Upagupta, very ruthless monarch like Ashoka also later not only converted to Buddhism, but also he himself became a monastic. And not only that, both his son Mahinda and his daughter became very influential to spread Dharma in Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka. So we're talking about how Dharma was influenced, Buddhism was influenced by people and kings and monks, and how the preceptor and the benefactor, spiritual preceptor and the benefactor worked hand in hand to make the Dharma to spread. So Indian subcontinent, the first couple of 100 years, because all the upholders of the Dharmas were all what we call arhats, and they were mainly, basically all of the people who became the disciple took ordination. Basically it was a monastic order. So Buddhism was started as a monastic order, and it actually have stayed very, 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 very central to Buddhism, was very monastic. Except about 400 AD. About 400 AD, then there came about the rise of Mahayana Buddhism, because there were a lot of fractures within the Sangha, depending to how strict or how relaxed we should be about some of the vows, because there were a lot of controversy and argument even during the Buddha, when Devadatta said they should modify the rules because they were too relaxed. Others said no, they were too strict or whatever. So there were lots of these various factions, whether one should keep salt more than for one meal, or whether one can keep salt, things like that. They were all saying, oh, it's infraction, he's keeping salt between his two fingers. Some monks were walking, he finished his meal, but he's still holding some salt between two fingers. They say, oh, that's an infraction. So there were a lot of really nitpicking about minor. So in this way, whole Buddhism later on about 400 AD fractured into 18 Nikaya schools. 18 different schools we call Nikaya. They were all not philosophically that different. So philosophically they all adhere to the Three Ratna, refuge in the Triple Gem, and 3 seals of Dharma, 4 noble truths, 8-fold path, 12 links of interdependent origination. They don't have any argument with following that. But the monastics were saying who is true to this Vinaya and who is not true to the Vinaya. So they have all kind of interpretation. They end up having 18 schools. And among them, one of them is Mahasangika. Mahasangika is later on became the Mahayana kind of version of it. So they realized Buddhism was really strongly a kind of a monastic order. It was appealing only to the few people who had the good kind of inclination to become a monastic. It was very, 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 very sexist. If you really look at it, it was very sexist. Even though Buddha himself ordained women, but the whole, after passing of the Buddhas, how they treated Ananda, and one of his infraction was that he influenced the Buddha to ordain women, and he was treated with a great contempt. And so it was even though during the first few hundred years there were a a lot of female arhats and so on. But still it became a really a strong force that was divided on the basis of very specific argument about the nitty-gritty details of the Vinaya. So the 18 Nikaya schools are all different Vinaya schools, arguing who is more strict, who is more authentic to the teaching, who is adapting according to the geography or location or climate and so on. Because if you look at it, some of them, the vows, for instance, you can see all the Theravadan monks are keeping their shoulders bare, particularly females' bare shoulder doesn't really look good, in the modern, you're supposed to be covered to be as modest as possible, but showing the bare shoulder, So, but when the Buddhism spread to other countries or other geographical locations where the weather was really cold, like Kashmir and so on, and Tibet and so on, of course the Vinaya had to adapt it. Some of the rules has to be adapted. So the 18 Nikaya school was simply Vinaya sub-schools, nothing to do with philosophical to a larger degree. So in this way, what's a very interesting thing is about around the 4th century, but actually some people would argue much earlier that because Nagarjuna came in 2nd century AD, So 2nd century AD, Nagarjuna is considered to be one of the great promulgators of Mahayana Buddhism. Of course, teaching itself was there, but how much it was surfaced and became popularized outside is more. Outside is the question. Because Buddhism was largely a monastic tradition, it mainly favored the took precedent over the other practices, mainly for the monastic. Lay people were mainly providers of the lineage as benefactors and so on. But the Mahasangika school not only demanded that rules need to be relaxed, and at the same time that inclusion of lay practitioners as well. So because Ananda himself asked in one of the encounter with the Sanghas, what was the Buddha's description of Sanghas? And Ananda said, Sangha need 4 members. And the 4 members are bhikkhus, bhikkhunis, and then laymen, laywomen, Laymen and laywomen were considered mainly as devotees and providers, And maybe they can only practice as providers because they're otherwise tainted to be practitioners. They have desire, they have family, they have wealth, they make money, and they engage in all kinds of profession that makes profit and so on, and they were not really accordingly. So even though the 4 members of Sanghas are considered to be bhikkhu, bhikkhunis, and laymen and laywomen, but laymen and laywomen was only treated more as the providers to the bhikkhu and bhikkhunis. In this way, they provided temporal and material needs of the Sangha, and Sangha provided spiritual needs of the laity. So that was the kind of attitude until the 4th century arising of the Mahayana schools. So in this way, what we see is around the passing away of the Buddha, Venerable Mahakashyapa had to negotiate how best that the Dharma should be ensured. It is said during those first few 100 years, all the monastics were arhats, and they all had the art of non-forgetfulness. They can remember every word for word of the sutras and Vinaya, but they always have to do fortnightly reciting. Fortnightly, they always have to gather together, particularly the monastics, and they have to get at least the senior abbot to recite, particularly some of the Vinayas. They need to hear the Vinaya Sutra, particular discourse on the Vinaya every fortnight. So because they were hearing the Vinaya from the seniors and the young ones always listening to them, the discourses never were actually original teachings of anyone speaking like these days Dharma teachers give. They always were going for word what was the sutra, and they were always going over the sutras. So in the Theravada Pratimoksha, Tripitaka, you will see 3 versions of those discourses. the short version, middle version, and longer version. And most of those sutras are very beautiful. I shouldn't say most. All of them sutras are very beautiful because they're all related with Buddha and who came to what, who came to see the Buddha when, and what problem they brought about, and what answers Buddha gave to them. And all the teachings were mainly to do with the story. And the story is all the sutras is a story, like the Kisa Gotami Sutra, Angulimala Sutra, Meeting Between Father and Son Sutra. All the sutras are related with the life of Buddha and interaction between him and his disciples. And therefore, the life of Buddha is crucial in legitimizing Buddhism. When people are knowing very little about the life of the Buddha and the discourses Buddha gave to whom, on what occasion, or the Dhammapada, for instance. Dhammapada is just one small example of collection of Buddha sayings. But these collection of sayings were said by the Buddha on different occasions. Every verse of the Dhammapada has a story. That story is connected with life of the Buddha and the people who he came to see him. Beautiful, So there is Dhammapada. All Buddhists should study Dhammapada, and the Dhammapada's commentary that has each of the verse has a commentary and a story that goes with that. And these will therefore inform people to know a lot about the life of the Buddha and his teachings. And then Buddhism, after say 300 years AD, then of course totally some people translated them from Pali to Sinhalese, or Pali to Thai, or whatever other languages. And in Tibetan Buddhism, we actually have all the Dhammapada sutras also in Tibetan Buddhism too. But they were dispersed. Tibetan Buddhist Mahayana collection of the text is very dispersed because the number of the texts we have is three, four times more than the Theravadins have. Because Theravadins have their version and they wouldn't accept the Mahayana versions of it. But Mahayana versions are not contrary to the Theravadan versions. But Theravadan versions are much more condensed and much original, I must say that. They're much more original. They don't have many kind of additions and deletions. They are basically a very original texts that in which they were taught and compiled and then again consolidated. So what we're saying is that life of the Buddha is very crucial, because then how all the teachings are taught by the Buddha. Either he taught directly through his words, speaking to them, or by endorsing others who engage in the conversation, and Buddha then endorsed their questions and answers, or those that he transmitted through his meditation for the teachings to occur. So the life of the Buddha basically helps people to get closer to the original teachings of the Buddha. And then however many branches of the teachings that Buddhism has produced by spreading to so many countries, and nowadays we see them in many countries where some people become much more one sutra centric, like White Lotus Sutras. Like some people in Japan or China, they just honor one sutra. That's it. They don't talk about other sutras. Like in Theravada, like in Japanese, they are Heart Sutra centric. Heart Sutra centric. They have to do Heart Sutra. When somebody dies, they do Heart Sutra. When they do celebration of the Vesak, they do Heart Sutra. They have just Heart Sutra. Both bread and butter of the Zen Buddhists are Heart Sutra. And Heart Sutra is shortest of the text, but otherwise there's a much bigger text. Like Tibetan Buddhism got 100,000 version of the Heart Sutra in 12 volumes, and then medium version is 25,000. That's verses, 4 volumes, and shortest version is 8,000 verse one big volume. The Heart Sutra is only 25 verse length. It's only 2 pages, So these are Mahayana literature. the Mayan literature does not exist in Theravada literature. But the very contents of the teaching of Mayan literature are very, very, very original, what the Buddha taught. So you can see over the years, as the Buddhism spread, teaching spread to different places, and so the countries like Japan and Tibet and China and so on, their spread of Mayan Buddhism very much to the central teachings of the Buddha's Eightfold Path. There's no doubt about that. It's just question is how much variation and additional variation there exists on the basis of emphasis on, say, emphasis on bodhicitta, than the monastic's renunciation. So in Mahayana Buddhism, you see the emphasis on more to the altruism than one's abstention or renunciation of the worldly and householder life. Still, in Mahayana countries, from Japan to Tibet, they still would honor anyone who could live the life of a renunciate. But the renunciate life of monks in Tibet and China would treat it more as a royalty. As a result of that, it became the opposite. They're supposed to be renunciate, they become more comfortable. So, more comfortable than they're supposed to be. Whereas the monastic life of the Sri Lanka and southern Buddhist countries, they've remained fairly simple. And in China and Tibet, they said that the emperors didn't want their spiritual preceptor to living on alms on the street. It brings shame on the king. So the preceptors were not allowed to live their simple life because of the pride of the kings and emperors. So as a result of that, the kings and emperors received the monastics with even more respect than the kings themselves received. As a result of that, there's a lot of regal and royalty treatment of the monastic in Mahayana Buddhist countries. In Theravada Buddhist countries, the respect is still shown, but the respect is shown for the Sangha, but still Sanghas actually live on alms. Sanghas don't live in penthouse monasteries. Sanghas live in caves, and Sanghas walk barefoot, because in Sri Lanka you have to walk barefoot. Why put on boots when it's so hot? In Tibet, even though you're a very good monastic, but you can't walk barefoot, because it's so cold. So Vinaya had to adapt it to different countries, so on. But where the Mahayanists and the emperors of Tibet and China and Japan treated their spiritual preceptors has completely changed the relationship between how the sanghas lived. Sanghas hardly go on begging alms, even in Tibet or Nepal or China. Sanghas are always provided in their comfortable monasteries, and they never have to do. So there is that kind of a big shift of the how the disciplines are kept, and how that discipline has been somewhat not kept, laxed. As a result of that, some say, oh, they're not the real one, they never keep those real things, and so therefore they have the prejudice towards each other. So you can see why the schools are developed as a result of who they think are most pure or originally following the original Vinayas and Sutras as a monastic. But now we come into the 21st century Buddhism, where we are talking about how to practice Buddhism by everyday people rather than by monastics. So we are now basically reinterpreting Buddhism for the laity, which was a fairly neglected area of Buddhism. Because Buddhism was, that's why they emerged. This school probably was Thich Nhat Hanh's group was involved. It's called engaged Buddhism, because there was this misperception. Buddhism was not really engaged to the society or the main people. They were just supporting a couple of monks all the time, just just making a roster who can cook for the monks, and that was all about the activities of the temple. There wasn't any activity that the Buddhist groups were doing in the society, like hospital or feeding the poor or educating the orphans, or very little of that was really happening. Socially, not so engaged, because they were all basically renouncing the society. See, monasticism was basically renouncing the society. Now that was and is still the main focus of traditional Buddhist. But now in the 21st century, there is a very, very strong call, maybe advocated indirectly by His Holiness Dalai Lama, having Buddhists to be working, rubbing shoulders with the scientists, and if scientists can find fault in Buddhism, Buddhism need to be changed. All this kind of amazing, kind of a revolutionary idea is, of course, forcing Buddhism to be reinterpreted to the contemporary peoples, how life of Buddha's teaching should be now reinterpreted as an adapted practice in our everyday life in today's world. So that's what we're going to stop here today. Any of you have few comments or questions, you're most welcome to do before we conclude, in the chat box if you have. Please do that before we finish. So we will have one more session next week on the same topic. After that we'll move on a new topic. So there being no any pressing questions, so I'll leave you to it. So because if you look at Buddhism and its effect in everyday life, like ourselves, and people who are living a normal worldly life, and still try to draw a lot of benefit from Buddhism. Definitely, Buddhism has appealed to the much greater sort of circulation than what is traditional Buddhists always see themselves as a devotee to the monastics and providing them, and that the number of Buddhists are decreasing mainly because of that. So if we wanted to increase Buddhist population, we need to reinterpret how to make Buddhist teaching relevant to everybody's, every contemporary person's life, rather than merely cater for the few monastics. If you look at the monastic population, it's decreasing so much, and decreasing so much. Even traditional countries like Thailand or Burma I do not know much, Sri Lanka, if you look at that, number of the people becoming monks are high, but most of them only doing for 3 weeks or 2 weeks, and that's it. So the rest of the life they have no intention to become monk. So they, even when they take the 3 months, but they have no intention to stay a monk after 3 months. So this kind of tokenism of Buddhism has definitely shown that it has lacked leadership. Buddhism is so much a medicine for the mind. It needs much more, I would say, constructive interpretation and adaptation to the greater humanity rather than the few. By doing that, it has only tried to keep the old tradition, but it hasn't really made very great advance to spread very far, because most people find it's too hard. So they don't want to give up this. They don't want to give up this. So basically, how many want to be renunciate? If you look at India, Indian religious monks have much more better renunciate than Buddhist monks. If you look at the Indian sadhus, they really do the hard way. They really live near naked, and they really have a little metal water container and the bare minimum necessities, and they never have a shelter. They actually live the life of mendicants. Whereas Buddhist way of keeping the monastic life was more like a tokenism. and trying to keep as only a tradition, but not really reinterpreting of its value in everyday person's life. Of course, if you have three, or sometimes they say Buddhism is not going to be possible to live if there is no monks. Of course, 4 members of the sanghas are considered to be sign of the existence of the Dharma. Where there is no 4 members of sangha working together, harmonious together, Dharma will be definitely compromised. That's for sure. The question is not so much the number of the sanghas. Question is however few they are they working together? Are they working together, or are they become just as egotistically difficult, not being able to work with anybody, and they're not engaged to helping even each other, let alone the society. No wonder the number is decreasing. The number is decreasing because they're either idealists or non-performers. So middle way is not either of these two. It shouldn't be idealists and non-performers. It should be middle way. So that's why in Tibet in 11th century, when Buddhism was standardized, the king made a ruling that we will allow lay sangha as well as ordained sangha. And the lay sangha was very much the original idea of Ananda, saying the layman and laywoman shouldn't be treated as layman, as the Western connotation of the English word layman means uneducated, they don't know anything like that. But doesn't mean that. Layman, layperson, laity could be just as educated in Dharma. Nowadays, every layman and laywoman are very educated. Everybody is literate. If you give them a Dharma book, they'll read in 3 days. What used to take 3 years to teach as a textbook in the monasteries, nowadays people will read in 3 days. You just need to teach them, explain them. So now we have a highly educated society, and therefore it's a well and due time to reinterpret what it means to have a sangha. So that's why in Theravadan still there's a sanghas are only those are ordained, and that's it. And others got no role at all. They make it's a kind of a caste system was created. The caste system is created in that very distinction between man and woman, distinction between sangha and layperson, and this has become another caste system. Now, Buddhism needs to be a lot more than that. It should transcend the caste system, transcend the discrimination between gender. I mean, Buddhism still has a lot to deal with this issue of female ordination, still not really spearheaded or guided elegantly by the leaders because of their conservatism, because they don't want to break the tradition, because they want to look good in the books, but actually not really want to do anything in view of that. So because Buddhism is now meeting a lot of audience that are completely educated and non-cultural Buddhist background, of course it's got extraordinary opportunity to remodify and develop and understand. And of course, Buddhism in the West is very, very, very young in comparison to how Buddhism took root in other countries like Tibet or China, or how the first 300 is nothing really, never considered to be established. Of course, now the speed of the growth in establishment is much faster than in the old days, yeah, because everybody can read information to access the Dharma knowledge, and texts are basically there on online. If you search Dharma Chakra Paravatana Sutra, you will find half a dozen translations right on the fingertips you can find. And so therefore we are much more speedier in terms of informing and educating people, and therefore there is a great call. It's called Ekayana. There shouldn't be Triyana. There shouldn't be called Vajrayana, Mahayana. There should be Ekayana. The Eka means one vehicle. That one vehicle is the Dharmayana. People should just follow the Dharma, and that will be safe if they just stick with the Buddha's teachings and the central teachings of the Buddha, and maybe a little bit of other facets of the original transmissions, teachings, they're all related, whether they are deity yoga or whether they are simple meditation or chanting sutras, or they're all designed to train the mind and body and thought and speech behaviors of the individual in order to transform karmic predicament of the individual. So we will conclude here. Thank you, everybody. Oh, so we do the dedication of merit. Oh, bade mere me hovaga da deva menzaga hameze me ale bere robe from the ocean bada desenede me manju shehode samanda bada de lava I lost the text there. So that I've lost. I'll say that in Tibetan. Chanju sem jorim boje, ma je ba na je jurje, je ba nya ba me ba, kone kondum be wa jon jam ba we, je daran jem ba da, kondo sam be de yan de jen. Te da kun je je zo da loj, gewan de da danje radu. Thank you, everyone.